Is anybody not ready? Perfect. Westlake negates in our first contentions Israel. The withdrawal of U.S. forces in the status quo has corresponded with a rise in Israeli tensions, as Herald 20 confirms that rising tensions between Israel and Iran are developing against the backdrop of U.S. withdrawal from the Middle East, making a clash imminent. There are 3 reasons why affirming would cause an all-Israeli war. First is emboldening Israel's enemies. Ahrar 19 writes that the American decision to disengage from Israel would embolden Iran and its proxies. Paula continues that the U.S. withdrawal would allow Iran to have a freer hand to operate inside Iraq and ultimately in Israel's own frontiers. Second is causing an Israeli panic. Pollock writes that American withdrawal will make Israel feel obliged to increase its forays against terrorists inside Iraq, which would increase the risk of retaliation. Third is allowing for weapon smuggling. Shimon 11 explains that American forces in Iraq act as a barrier smuggling rockets into the West Bank to Hezbollah. Critically, Lapin 19 writes that allowing Hezbollah to acquire more rockets would boost their confidence and thus embolden them to take risks, ultimately culminating in conflict. For these 3 reasons, Ahram 20 concludes that should the U.S. withdraw its forces, Israel will find itself in a war. An Israeli war would be devastating, as Moore 9 finds that if Israel was ever devastated by any kind of war, it would retaliate against any actor, including Russian and European targets that threatened Israel in the past. Russia would respond with nuclear weapons, leading to a global nuclear war that kills billions. Our second contention is Bahrain. The Middle East Policy Council writes that Iran has embarked on a larger game of avoiding direct conflict with Bahrain for now. However, Iran has an incentive to take over Bahrain. Indeed, Al-Tamimi of Oxford College writes that the gradual takeover of Bahrain is crucial for Iran to recognize its ambitions of dominating the Persian Gulf. U.S. military presence has been key from preventing an Iranian standoff over Bahrain for 2 reasons. The first is halting a Shiite uprising. McDaniels 13 of Brookings writes that the United States has helped support Bahrain's Sunni government with its presence. However, McDaniel continues that were the U.S. to remove its forces, the Shia majority would have greater power. Unfortunately, Ronald 13 writes that a power grab by the Shia within Bahrain would cause an Iranization of the area that would quickly spread to Saudi Arabia. The second is deterring Iran's military. McDaniel 13 writes that the absence of U.S. presence would create a power vacuum and eliminate the moderating effect of U.S. influence in any Bahraini crisis. Al-Tamimi of Oxford continues that the presence of the U.S. Navy off the coast of Bahrain has been critical in preventing an Iranian invasion. Unfortunately, Manuel 17 writes that if Iran takes over Bahrain, they will use the opportunity to seize Saudi oil fields, escalating tensions within the region. Iranian confrontation would escalate, as Lackman 11 writes that any Iranian confrontation in Bahrain would lead to direct conflict with Saudi Arabia. The Washington Institute in 2011 warns that Bahrain is home to Saudi Arabia's supply of oil, and thus any crisis would quickly escalate into an international issue. France 24 it finds that the past proxy wars have killed hundreds of thousands of people. Additionally, this can lead to nuclear war, as AB 13 writes that an attack on Iran would escalate to a large-scale war. Russia and China would be drawn, and nuclear weapons would be used by miscalculation, resulting in the complete extinction of humanity. Our third contention, Saudi Arabia. Withdrawing from the Middle East would inflame tensions with Saudi Arabia for 2 reasons. The first is panic. With our security in the region, Walsh 19 finds that Saudi Arabia has pursued negotiations in Yemen, resulting in easing tensions. Unfortunately, Pollock furthers that because our allies aren't as capable as us and often over-exaggerate the Iranian threat, when the U.S. disengages from the Middle East, they overreact and worsen the situation when they try to take matters into their own hands. For example, Brands 18 writes that most of Saudi Arabia's wrongdoings like Yemen were motivated by the belief that the United States was leaving the Middle East. Stopping the next Yemen is important, as Lynch 19 quantifies that the Yemen war killed 233,000 people by the end of 2019 and would kill nearly 500,000 through 2022. Second is proliferation. Saudi prolif is extremely unlikely right now. Gazunski 13 writes that the American nuclear umbrella has remained preferable for Saudi Arabia over purchasing or pursuing any independent effort to obtain nuclear weapons. Tamini 13 explains that the proliferation attempts will betray the U.S. and sacrifice the security that Riyadh desires to maintain. However, if we withdrew our security from the region, Crosby 19 finds that Saudi Arabia will work to obtain their own bomb either by purchasing one directly or paying scientists from another nuclear state to develop their own program. Problematically, Edelman furthers that emerging nuclear powers would not have second strike capabilities and could be forced to launch preemptive attacks. The authority to launch weapons will be in the hands of low-level commanders, and the risk of an accidental launch will be high. Ultimately, Star 14 concludes that the consequences of even a small nuclear war from such a decrease in second strike capabilities will cause catastrophic disruptions of global climate, ultimately resulting in extinction. Thus, we negate.
Okay, can I call for some cards, please? Okay, can I see the link evidence that Iran would invade Bahrain or whatever, whatever link evidence that is?
Sure.
And then
wait, we give the incentive at the top, and then we say that U.S. military presence stops them from invading. Do you want to see the thing that says that Navy stops them?
So yeah, sure. Yeah, just send some send what you think is your best link evidence.
All right, cool.
Can I call for 2 pieces of evidence?
Let me grab the Navy card first. Sorry.
Here, Nathan, you can ask me.
Okay. On your C1, it's the one that says Israel will feel obliged, and it uses the word forays. That one.
Oh, Pollock.
Yeah, Pollock. Yeah. And then on your C3, the Brands evidence.
Give me a second.
You're good.
I just sent the Navy stops Bahrain invasion.
Miles, I think you have the Pollock evidence on the Israel DA.
Oh yeah, I'll send Pollock. Give me one
Sorry,
second.
the last one was Brands.
Yeah, Browns.
Okay, I think I have that one.
Praveen, did you get the card you asked for?
Let me check.
Wait, what did you want from Brands? Because I think we might cite it multiple times.
I just sent.
In your sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay. In your C3, you talk. I think on on the first reason on negotiations, you talk about how it's over exaggerated, or like Saudi Arabia over exaggerates the threat and then they'll attack that piece of evidence.
Oh,
I think that's Pollock as well, Jace.
I think that might be Pollock.
Okay.
Part of Pollock, so
Okay.
we should get it.
Yeah. Okay. I just thought it was Brands, but that's fine.
Oh wait, I still haven't got the first one. I don't know if my
Neha, do you still want that Pollock evidence?
Yes. Sorry.
Cool.
Also, I think Miles, you sent it on the one that said Octos, not JK real Octos.
Oh, that's the reason why Praveen didn't get it.
All right.
Miles,
Yeah.
is this the one that I'm highlighting is the Pollock evidence, right?
It's Jason. It's the link evidence for the first link of Saudi Arabia.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think it's the right one.
Is it the same thing that Miles
It's-
already sent?
It's a different part of the
It
article.
should be a different part of the article.
Yeah, we'll just resend like the card.
Okay. Cool.
So I just sent the link evidence for Bahrain for the Navy, and I also sent the link evidence for link 2 of Israel.
Yeah, Neha, you can read Chase. I'll just read it while
Okay, we should be fine. Is everyone good?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay. All right. We affirm contention 1 is foreign aid. The Borgen Project 19 finds that when the federal government chooses how to allocate funds in the fixed discretionary budget, the most often debated is military spending versus foreign aid. Rotor 17 finds that Congress has chosen to divert funds to the military at the direct expense of the aid budget. Following the trend of U.S. militarism in recent years, the gap between military spending and aid has widened drastically. For example, Word of Vox 20 finds that in 2017, in order to finance additional spending on nuclear weapons, the government made cuts from the foreign aid budget. However, withdrawing the U.S. military presence from the Persian Gulf would reverse this trend, as cutbacks on defense spending would ease budgetary pressure, thus lessening the trade-off. This is empirically true, as the Congressional Research Service writes in 2011, when the U.S. started to draw down troops in Iraq, it used the funds from decreased military expenditures to increase humanitarian aid to Africa by over a third. Specifically, Gregory of the Institute for Strategic Studies quantifies that removing U.S. military presence in the Gulf would reduce our defense budget by 15%. Critically, the Borgen Project furthers that just a 5% reduction in military spending would double the current budget for foreign aid, increasing its effectiveness 2 to 3 times. The impact is profound, as USAID Gov finds that each year the U.S. provides life-saving assistance such as food, education, and healthcare for over 150 million people. And even if this aid sending doesn't increase, preventing cuts is crucial, as Time magazine finds that for every 1% reduction in the aid budget, it takes away life-saving assistance from 1 million people. Contention 2 is the Middle Eastern story. Mali 19 finds that the chances of an all-out war in the Middle East are riper than at any point in recent memory, and U.S. military presence exacerbates this for 2 key reasons. The first is by removing a zero-sum game. Barzagar 10 explains that from Iran's perspective, the highly visible presence of American forces in the Persian Gulf is perceived as an attempt at balancing Iran's power in the region, which is why a majority of its military maneuvers are to counter U.S. security troops. However, Barzagar furthers that if the U.S. were to leave, Iran would actually switch their aggressive stance to one of regional cooperation. Indeed, the Atlantic Council finds that Iran has already proposed a diplomatic plan to ensure sustainable peace, but will not pass it through until America removes its military presence in the region. Indeed, the FT furthers that Iran will push for economic interdependence through joint investments, creating a lasting peace agreement. This is empirically verified, as Defense One finds that U.S. military withdrawal from Afghanistan caused Iran to push a diplomatic posture through joint investments, bringing peace to the region. Similarly, Parsi Foreign Affairs writes that when the U.S. did not respond offensively in 2019, Iran headed to the negotiating table with Saudi Arabia, decreasing airstrikes by 80%, leading to 0 civilian casualties. Friedman 14 analyzes that while Iran is inherently defensive in nature, It doesn't want US troops on its border, and he thus concludes that if Iran's borders were demilitarized, it would become diplomatic with its comparatively weak military and the political costs it would incur were it to continue expansion. The second is fostering regional multilateralism. Reducing military presence in the region will lead to greater regional stability via the creation of multilateral institutions that are better poised to face security threats. Knights 13 finds that Gulf states too heavily rely upon the US security guarantee, often engaging in bilateral negotiations rather than more effective multilateral ones. Fortunately, Tabatai 14 explains that withdrawal of US presence in the region would encourage and strengthen a sense of ownership and shared responsibilities amongst regional actors. This is key, as Valesco 13 finds that when regional organizations like the GCC pursue their own forms of diplomacy, they are 6.7 times more likely to craft peace agreements that will last longer. Empirically, Hamaduddin 13 writes that during the 1990s, Saudi Arabia and Iran were able to overcome ideological differences and craft a domestic security agreement, only to be disrupted when the US-led Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait. More broadly, Musabin 15 writes that American forces in the Gulf have destroyed cordial relations amongst many regional actors, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq, creating a climate where it's no longer possible for effective communication. The impact is galvanizing the Gulf. Maleki 14 writes that 30 years of polarized hostility have reinforced miscommunication and therefore increased the chance of miscalculation. Critically, Maleki concludes that a small-scale or accidental military encounter could become a lot bigger, which Ward 20 of Vox concludes would leave hundreds of thousands dead, potentially initiating a civil war that would bring more carnage to the region.
Are you ready for cross?
Yes.
Good. So on your second argument about regime stability, on your second contention, specifically for your bilateral talks thing, why can the United States not continue to have bilateral talks without its military presence in the region with these countries?
Well, I would argue that these bilateral negotiations would probably not benefit as much if the U.S. doesn't have anything like leverage-wise. So, I don't really
Does the United States have economic leverage over these countries?
Yeah, a certain amount of them for sure.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So at that point, they're still able to use their economic leverage to get these countries into bilateral talks, right?
Right, but we're saying that it's more like, so the link is actually pretty clear, but Knight specifically references like the military.
My point is that as long as we have economic leverage over them, these bilateral talks will continue, which delegitimizes the GCC. You may have a question.
Okay. So on your guys' contention one about Israel, you say that Israel is going to feel like obliged to attack, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you actually, I'm pretty sure if you read the card, it doesn't necessarily actually give you the reasoning for like oblige. It just suggests that like Iran would be scared. But like my bigger question is, if the U.S. can continue
Israel being scared, it's not about Iran being scared. But yeah, you can continue.
Yeah. Okay. But my bigger question is, if the U.S. can continue their security guarantee with Israel, how does your contention get like triggered?
What we say is that there might be still some security within the region, but the overall perception, if you're reducing a ton of military presence from the region, particularly in conflict zones like Iraq that Israel cares a lot about because of Hezbollah, then that uniquely triggers a hardline. Cool.
Okay. Yeah, you can have a question.
So on to your second contention about the Middle East. You cite the Parsi evidence, which says that there is an 80% decrease in airstrikes. What was the United States doing with our military forces in Syria at the same time?
So yeah, we've heard this we've had this Parsi conversation in like a bunch of different rounds, right? I would say like for one, we can look towards like our other empirical examples, but on like Parsi specifically, I would say that just the fact that the US troops, like just to clarify, I guess, the US troops were we would say they refused to respond to Iranian aggression, which is why we saw Saudi Arabia go to negotiations.
Right, but I don't think you're getting to the root of my question, right? What we did with US forces at the same time was we did a limited withdrawal from Syria, right? We didn't fully withdraw our forces from the Persian Gulf. And that in case proves our point, right? Had we removed nearly all of our military presence from the Persian Gulf, we would use that leverage that we used against Saudi Arabia whenever we do these limited pullouts that cause Saudi Arabia to pursue negotiations.
Yeah, I understand, but I would argue that it's not necessarily, I would argue that the limited withdrawal, the fact that with just a limited withdrawal, they were able to go to negotiations proves that with a larger withdrawal, they know that
the point that I'm making is that the only time we have leverage is if we still have military presence, right? Once we get rid of all of our nearly all of our military presence, that's when we lose the key bargaining chip that has allowed Saudi Arabia to pursue negotiations.
But about bargaining chips specifically. That's like what we tell you. We say like the fact of the matter is, without the U.S., Saudi Arabia doesn't have the like grounds to go attack. So it's not about leverage specifically here.
Sure. Cross it over.
Okay, I needed some pieces of evidence. So I need that like the US pulls out means the GCC suddenly starts working. And then I just need your best external link evidence on your first advantage. Is that fine?
The best link evidence on our like aid stuff?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, just give me a second, I'll pull it up. Okay, Neha, I'll send you this first one. Just send it over the email chain. Okay, yeah, Neha, can you send the thing I sent to your email on your email on the email chain? And then 8.
All right, I just sent the first card.
And also let us know when y'all are
Yeah.
running prep.
I'm waiting for the email right now.
Okay.
Can I start running prep when I get both the cards?
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool, cool. Tabatabai. Okay, cool. And then the 8 card.
Yeah. Okay, Neha, I sent you the aid stuff. Hey, Jason, let me know if you want more. Like, I'm not sure specifically what we want. I put the thing evidence I think is the best link evidence, but if you want more.
Okay, cool. It probably will be fine, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just waiting for it right now.
Yeah, I think Neha's sending it away.
Oh, okay.
All right, I just sent both. Just let me know when y'all got the second one.
I'm not getting it. I'll restart my email. Oh, I think I just got it. So we'll start taking prep. Okay. So
Jason, mute yourself on the call.
yeah, I muted myself on the call. So I just took 50 seconds, I think. Is that about right? So it's going to be only turns on their first advantage and then turns on their second advantage, and then some defense at the bottom. Is there anyone not ready? Cool. On their first advantage, 4 turns. First comes from Langenkopf, which explains that right now, developmental aid just fuels exploitation by governments because governments don't have to be accountable to the people anymore because they don't care about how much tax money they receive because they receive aid in place of that. Easterly finds that what this has done is it's caused our billions of dollars of aid to do absolutely nothing, which gets rid of their how 1% decreases to 1 million people receiving less aid because it doesn't do anything anyways. You turn this again because Anderson explains that aid goes directly to the government, which means that the government has a less of incentive to account for the population and more of an incentive to put money elsewhere, such as military expenditures, which empirically cause them to be more aggressive and increase conflict, which turns both their first and second contention because it makes more countries aggressive across the entire world that receive US aid. Third, you turn it again, as the GNU finds that a 1% increase in aid decreases the GDP of a country by 3.65% because it disincentivizes development and just gives them a buffer in the form of them continuing to receive aid. And fourth, you turn it again, because none explains that aid goes to these countries, but then only goes to the rich people in these countries and the corrupt people because aid distribution is incredibly corrupt, which means that it doesn't go to the people at the poor and only exacerbates inequality in these countries. Lastly, if we win our case, it's a prereq to their case. Economic development cannot happen if conflict is constantly happening. Even if they keep sending aid, people keep dying from conflict, which A, destroys infrastructure, B, makes FDI flows impossible, and C, devastates the economies of these countries, which means that whoever solves for conflict best solves best for their first advantage. On their second advantage, only turns again. On the top, the Economic Times 20 explains that Iran is actually stepping down because the main goal is they want to preserve their own regime, and they know that a war against the US will mean they will get destroyed. So after the Soleimani strike, they actually started to back down and de-escalate tensions with de-escalatory strikes and no strikes at all. You weigh this on empirics. They're going to come up here and tell you, oh, it's uniquely now different. But Maloney finds that in 1988, 2008, and now in 2020, every single time Iran has backed down, which proves that they will always do so when tensions get too high because they always want to avoid a conflict and they always want to avoid miscalculation. On their first link, 3 turns. The first comes from Knights, which explains that without the United States, Iran becomes more emboldened because they always have an incentive to counter their main hegemonic enemy in the area, which is Saudi Arabia, which means that they've advanced against Saudi Arabia and decreased the chance that diplomacy happens in the first place. Second, you turn it because Mabon explains that MBS has a lot of domestic pressure on himself to look strong, which means that were he to lose the US support, which is a linchpin for most of his power, he would also want to look stronger, and which means he wouldn't turn to diplomacy anyways. But third, you turn it again because Walsh explains that their Parsi evidence indicates that our leverage is working. Parsi tells you that diplomacy happened while the US military presence was still in the Gulf, which demonstrates that we can have presence in the area as well as leverage it to cause our allies to go towards diplomacy. We don't need to necessarily do one to get the other. But on the bottom, on the internal link level of their first link, 2 pieces of defense. The first comes from France, which explains that Iran attacks the United States even while doing quote-unquote diplomacy. There's no empirics that prove diplomacy has a long-term solution besides their Parsi evidence, which only talks about Yemen. But second, another piece of defense. Reuters explains that Iran will never stop doing diplomacy. They themselves say they will never do diplomacy until the US A takes away its sanctions, and B, they themselves tell you until the US takes away its presence. Insofar as the resolution asks to remove nearly all presence, any existence of the US presence gives political ammunition for Iranian hardliners to continue to be hardliners and continue offense, which means that they will never turn to diplomacy. On their second link, 4 turns. The first comes from Brands, which explains that probability proves that every time in the past, our allies get worse whenever the US has a pullout, which demonstrates that no, they're not going to turn to the GCC. They've never done so in the past. But second, you turn this because Thiessen explains that right now we're implementing sanctions on Iran. But Pollock explains that if Iran were able to invade Iraq because our presence was no longer there, they'd avoid the oil fields and be able to get the oil there, which means they get more money to fund more proxy conflicts, which means they don't turn to multilateralism. But third, you turn again because Pollock explains us pulling out leads to all of our allies panicking, which means they all start more conflicts independently across the Middle East, which means multilateralism fails. 2 pieces of defense. The first is that right now multilateralism won't work because they'll just turn to bilateral initiatives instead. They'll be fine that the Saudis have actually turned to the UAE and Kuwait to form bilateral corporations. They won't just suddenly start allying with everybody because they A, have a lot of ideological differences, B, have a lot of differences on how they manage energy, and C, have a lot of differences on how they want to converse with Iran, which means that the GCC will never happen, regional cooperation will never happen.
Jason, just to clarify, what was the response that you read after the response about how Iran would invade Iraqi oil fields?
After that, I was like, us leaving causes all of our allies to panic across the entire region, which leads to on-net increase in conflicts.
Okay. Okay, Neha, wait, get on a separate call. We're on prep. Give me a second. I haven't started time yet. 1 second. Okay. I'll start the time now. Okay. Okay. That was a minute and oh, shoot. That was a minute and 13. Okay, give me a second. I'll just pull my speech doc. Okay. So can everyone hear me okay? Okay, so I'll just be going down, frontlining his quote turns, and then I'll go down to I'll go to his case. All right. All right, give me a second, actually, sorry. Let's go to the computer. All right.
If you're gonna be really fast with the doc, do you mind sending the doc?
I don't think it will be too fast.
Okay, then it should be fine.
Yeah, just we can clarify if it's like too fast. Just say clear or something.
Yeah, no worries.
All right. Let's start the time. Now, on the fortunes, you can group them at the top. We say the U.S. aid is unique from normal aid in the past because World Bank finds that 96% of U.S. aid goes to NGOs domestically, which means that it doesn't actually go to the government. So they don't link it to the thing about dependence. They don't link it to the thing that the aid goes to the government, and they don't also link it to the thing that the aid only goes to the rich. But then they say that the GDP goes up. But Almeida looks at a 58 study meta-analysis said that aid actually has positive growth because it creates sustainable policies like infrastructure, which they can grow the economy off of. But then they say that the aid only goes to the rich. That's not true. Our U.S. aid evidence says that 150 million people in the status quo are benefiting from the aid, getting things like life-saving medicine. And we say that that's critical. Ultimately, they don't get access to any terms because ultimately, like, US aid is different. They just read general terms, but the US aid is different. We give it to NGOs. Then, on our second attention, they say that from the Economic Times that Iran is stepping down. But first, we say that's not true. Washington Examiner says that as a result of US intervention, Iran has increased their military spending by 90%. Clearly, they're not stepping down. Then, they say that Iran gets emboldened to fight Saudi Arabia. But we say that Iran wouldn't give them emboldened because they don't have the capacity to. I'll get onto that in their case. Then they say that MBS would want to turn stronger. But Rido says that when the US pulls out, MBS no longer has airstrike capabilities and airstrikes will be grounded over time, which is why he says that they would literally not be able to fight anything. So it doesn't matter if he's going to get more belligerent. But then they say the Parsi says diplomacy happened with US president, but they cold drop the warranty. The warranty is why Parsi says that because when the US started withdrawing or didn't use any offensive posture, then these countries realized that they cannot fight on their own, which is why they realized that they need to go towards diplomacy. That warrant is never contested, which is why you can extend our Parsi evidence says 80% reduction in airstrikes. And they say that Iran attacks during diplomacy. We say that empirics answer this back because we say that Iran dropped their airstrikes by 80%. Then they say that Iran won't negotiate until sanctions are removed. I'll have Neha frontline that defense in our summary. Then they say that allies get worse when the US pulls out. That's not true. We say that allies empirically have went towards the negotiating table. Then they say that Iran invades oil fields. They give you no quantification as to how much money Iran would actually get from these oil fields and how it would be enough to start escalating conflict. At that point, there's no contextualization, no amount of the turn. Then they say that they'll turn to bilateral negotiations. No, our Mohammedan evidence says that historically they went towards multilateral agreements, but they don't contest the war thing, which is that they realize that they have shared responsibility once the United States pulls out. So they have no choice but to negotiate because ultimately they need more multilateral agreements. Let's go to their case. On the first case about Israel, their first one about emboldening Israel and enemies. First, the argument would mean that Iran would have to expand into Iraq to respond first. Parts go for this that Iran is militarizing due to the existential U.S. threat. However, after the U.S., Iran will turn inwards. The Saudi AAA writes that they've been widening protests, demanding change, and threatening the Iran regime security. Indeed, Free Minister provides that the U.S. would pull out Iran actually exercise restraint in order to fuel economic investments. Then, second, foreign policy team writes that when countries like Saudi Arabia invest money into American system, it actually prompts Iran to develop more, which is why Washington Examiner and T quantifies that this will alone increase Iran's military spending by 90%. Then, let's go to the specific link. First on Iraq, it's truly not unique. Barzani finds that Iran has already been putting missiles in Iraq. We haven't seen any of the conflict that they talk about. Then we would say that Israel doesn't care for Iran's on its frontier because helping Iran says Israel's only planning on taking drastic measures to strike Iran because they have strong deterrence, so they're only going to bank on sanctions, not conflict. Then on Israel planning, there's no contextualization on the argument. They don't tell you to what extent Israel will actually start fighting in the region and to what extent it will cause retaliation. But second, Rogan 12 analyzes that Israeli leaders know that if they escalate in Iran, proxy wars in Syria would militarily intervene in Israel, causing even larger security threats. Third, CAC 15 writes that Israel missiles can't be launched by a small group. They have to be vetted through the entire cabinet. The cabinet doesn't support it. Then let's go to weapons smuggling. According to CAC 18, the argument is wrong because Hezbollah already has arrayed forces against Israel in vast quantities, meaning A, the military presence isn't doing anything, but second, since rockets are already there in vast amounts, their impacts are already triggered. Then go to their impact by Israeli war. So 19 New York Times finds that Israel has come to conflict several times that they never strike because America opposes it and they don't want to lose America's security guarantee. But then they say that Russia will come out of the Atlantic Council finds that Israel and Moscow transform into having strong diplomatic relations, preventing any friction. There's no chance of nuclear conflict because they have a hotline. Then continue to Bahrain. Bahrain would say that there will be no evidence that actually says that Iran will invade Bahrain if the U.S. pulls out. Critically, Brand 19 finds that destroying Iran only requires a few Navy ships or even a single aircraft carrier. The resolution doesn't call for removing all presence. But then Iran won't expand as we read already on the top on the first link on Israel. But then on the impact level, we say that if we win negotiations in Iran and Saudi Arabia, definitely will go to nukes. They don't get actually the impact. Then on their consistency about Saudi Arabia. On their first thing, they say that Saudi Arabia started the war because we left. Not true. BBC 20 writes that they started because Shia Houthis were taking over Yemen. The U.S. enabled the conflict by arming the Saudis to a fight. Then they say the negotiations are happening. These negotiations are trash. There's literally 241 violations in 48 hours. So they're clearly doing nothing. So you can turn the argument because we say that our empirics ultimately answer this back. Then on their second, the check that it would take decades for Saudi Arabia to develop a nuclear system. We would say the negotiations would have already solved the conflict with them. But second, Al-Marsi says that Saudi Arabia would not nuclearize even if the U.S. were to pull out because they know that economies would literally sanctions would literally destroy their economy and that would prevent their capacity to expand. But the third, we say that them building nukes actually good thing because Geller says that nuclear asymmetry increases the chance of conflict and trying to explain that both sides have nuclear weapons and they're actually not launching nuclear weapons at each other because there's mutually assured destruction.
I didn't catch some stuff. Your mic was kind of cutting out.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can clarify. If you,
Yeah, could you honestly on Israel, could you just clarify kind of everything on like from the second link down to the third link?
Yeah, okay. Second link,
Praveen, I think what would be the most helpful is if you emailed the doc,
Yeah,
Sure,
or
sure.
that works too.
because
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff was unclear for me.
Wait, actually,
Okay.
here's a better question. Is the stuff that you read on Israel, is any of it offense?
To be honest, no.
Okay.
Okay, cool, perfect. Thank you.
So you don't want it then?
No, I'm chilling.
I think we should still take the doc for the C2
Yeah,
and
Yeah, yeah,
C3.
yeah.
Nice, yeah.
I'll send that you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that, Praveen. Might be my
No, you're good.
internet.
It was a little bit faster than I thought it would be.
Mhm.
Okay, Neha, I just sent it here. Okay, Neha, I sent the things here. Just put in the email chain. Speech now.
We can probably start cross after we receive it.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll tell you whenever I get it.
Yeah.
Just send it, so give it like 10 seconds or so.
Okay, just got it. Thank you.
Do you want to just do cross while I was reading it?
Yeah, let's have some cross. Can I get the first question?
Sure.
Actually, I don't really have a question. Do you want to have a question?
Yeah. So, here with me.
Oh,
So
actually,
wait, you're just. Yeah, yeah. You
That's-
can have a question. Yeah,
could I ask for a clarification?
sure, sure.
You read somewhere that I don't even remember. You read the evidence. Oh, right. Okay, so your evidence about how aid helps 153 million people. Where is that from?
I mean, are you just gonna say it's biased from the USAID? I can find that.
It's from the usaid.com place. It's like, do you think that the
Okay.
USAID website has an incentive to talk about how great the USAID is?
I think the USAID website would be pretty good because they know where their aid is going, and we know
So
how
like, this is like remember the BRI topic, like when we were like, oh, your BRI evidence is from the Chinese propaganda website Xinhua, right? It's the
No,
same
like,
case
no,
here. It's from the American
like-
propaganda website.
I can hand you the World Bank evidence that says that 96% goes to NGOs who like increase like infrastructure and like all that stuff. But second, we would also say that like our net, like we have meta studies with like 58 studies that say that like aid increases in like growth because it creates like sustainable policies building up infrastructure in these
Okay,
countries.
so we can play evidence whack-a-mole all we want, I guess. Also, I'll just look at those later. But you can have a question.
All right. So what link evidence do you read that Iran would actually invade Bahrain?
Oh, yeah. It's the Al-Tamimi evidence, which indicates that they have the incentive to do so to gain more dominance over the Gulf as well as the Strait of Hormuz.
What evidence do you read that directly says that if the US pulls out, they're going to invade Bahrain?
That's both of our links. Like, are you just asking for me to reiterate my link?
No, your link, tell me why.
It's the Mandel evidence, which indicates that Iran would.
I get what your link says. I get what your link says. You're saying that US like specifically stops Iran from invading Bahrain, but what link evidence do you read that says that?
I don't get why we're having this conversation. Can you just call for the evidence?
Like, is it not the evidence that Miles sent me already?
It
I already
should
read
be.
that.
I mean, we can send you the whole thing if you want.
Say that if the US pulls out of the Persian Gulf, Iran's going to invade Bahrain. Like, you can have
Like,
rhetoric.
I don't know what you're looking for. Like, I
That's fine.
can send you the evidence. Like, I don't know what we gain from arguing about it now.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. You can have a question.
Okay, so let's see. I don't really have a question. You want another one?
Okay, I actually have a question. So, you say that Iran attacks during diplomacy. Like, how did this
Okay.
manifest in?
So they like were doing a diplomatic deal with the US and then they like bombed some bases at the same
What
time.
did this diplomatic deal entail?
I don't know, call for the evidence.
Were U.S. troops there?
US troops have been there for a while. US troops will
Yeah.
also still be there for a while.
That's
Like,
probably why the
I don't know why you chose not to frontline one of the best pieces of defense that we read, because Iran has been like, your own evidence is like Iran's like, we will always fight as long as the US is there, and the resolution is nearly all, so that the US is still there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had to frontline all your turns that weren't.
Yeah, but defense is also important, right? Okay, cool. That would probably be a good time to start taking our prep.
All right, sounds good.
Sorry, Praveen, could I ask a question?
Yeah, 1 second. Okay, yeah, what's up?
Did you read any offense on Saudi Arabia either?
On your Saudi Arabia thing? Yes, I did. I did on your second contention, or on your second warrant about prolif. I read that nuclear asymmetry is bad. Both sides having nukes is good. That's like the only turn I read.
Wait, isn't that just defense? Isn't that just the mad response?
Well, I guess yeah, you can say that functions defense. Yeah, that's fine.
It's defense? Okay, cool. So no offense on C3.
We'll go back to prep. Okay, we have 16 seconds left.
So the order of the speech is going to be our case weighing, then their case. Jason, can you mute yourself on the call?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Cool. Is anybody not ready? Perfect. Let's begin on our second contention about Bahrain. They make a couple responses. The first response is that there's no evidence to prove that we're going to invade Bahrain. I'll contest that whenever we get onto our actual link story. But our link story so far is very, very simple, and they haven't really actually contested it. Where MEPC evidence says is that Iran's not invading in the status quo. The Ultimately evidence gives the warrant that says that Iran wants to be able to have a stable region, but once the United States leaves the area, they'll dominate the Persian Gulf by invading Bahrain. It'll allow them to realize their hegemonic ambitions. That's where you can go to our second link about the military. What the McDaniels evidence proves is that whenever the United States leaves the area, it's going to cause a power vacuum and Iran will fill in. The Ultimately evidence says that the United States is absolutely crucial because our Navy right now is preventing an Iranian invasion. They say that there's no evidence to invade Iran. There absolutely is. The Ultimately evidence says that that Iran has an incentive to invade, but the United States' military presence is preventing them from realizing such goals. Insofar as this is true, we get clean access to our link story. What our Slackman evidence says is that in the case that the United States leaves the region, Iran will take the opportunity to invade Bahrain to increase the regional dominance. This is absolutely crucial because we give you the France 24 evidence that says that ultimately it will cost hundreds of thousands of lives because Saudi Arabia will be re-entrenched in the conflict, because once Iran invades, that's also where Saudi oil fields are located. So they'll get into the mix, which will ultimately cause hundreds of thousands of lives being lost. They try to say the negotiation solved. We outweigh negotiations in two ways. The first is on time frame, because we tell you that diplomacy takes months upon years to manifest, whereas our perception link triggers immediately. Once you remove the United States' military presence from the region, Iran has an immediate incentive, whereas diplomacy takes time. But the second way is on a prereq. If Saudi Arabia is caught in a regional war with Iran, there's no way that any regional actor is going to start negotiations because they're so highly destabilized and so focused on this conflict that there's no way they're going to start negotiations. So Bahrain always comes first. Let's go to their first contention about foreign aid. We extend the response that says that conflict is a prerequisite, which means that if Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and Iran get into a full regional war, then no aid goes into the region. They don't get access to their offense. On their second contention about the Middle East, they crucially do not respond to the terminal defense on the first link from Reuters that says that Iran will never do diplomacy because U.S. sanctions exist. Do not let them try to backline this in second summary, because that gives them 5 minutes to respond in both summary and final focus, whereas we only get 2 minutes to respond. So do not let them respond to this conceded terminal defense. On their second link about regional stability, extend the Pollock turn. It makes it really easy to vote for us. What the Pollock turn says is that whenever the United States leaves a region, all allies within the area become very unwary and they start to increase conflicts. This outweighs their case on magnitude, because once we're impacting out to multiple different conflicts with multiple different actors, not just Saudi Arabia and Iran, what we tell you is that it increases the number of like war zones within the region. This also short circuits their offense, because remember, whenever the United States, whenever a conflict is occurring, there's no way diplomacy can happen. But finally, at the bottom of their case, extend the Brands evidence. The Brands evidence says that all past wrongdoings done by allies within the region were due to the perception the United States is leaving the region. They say there's empirical evidence of multilateralism. That was in the 80s. Our Brands evidence postdates them and shows that all conflicts that have happened within the region are due because the United States was leaving the region. Thus, we're proud to negate.
Okay, we're just gonna run prep. I'll start the time. All right, yeah, we're good.
Are y'all out of prep?
I believe we have like 15 seconds.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'll quickly run prep for this. Just concede that conflict prereqs 8, okay?
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
okay. Is everyone good? So I'm gonna start on their case and then go to our case. Okay. Let's start on Bahrain. There's a lot of problems here. First, we would say that there's no evidence that Bahrain will actually be invaded because of a US pullout. They literally take two random blips of evidence and connect together that Iran has an incentive. Problematically, they don't respond to the many, many warnings we give you for the fact that Iran just simply can't expand even if they want to. Here's why. We tell you first, Slavin tells you because of the US sanctions they talk about, their currency has dropped over 70%, which means they don't have the economic capacity to expand. But second, what Saidi specifically tells you is that there are many internal protests. And every single time we've seen these internal protests happen in Iran, Iran has prioritized those protests over expansion. That means at that point, Bahrain is completely gone because they tell you Iran wants regional power. It doesn't matter what Iran wants. If the internal riots continue, they're going to prioritize that. At that point, the only risk of any conflict is actually on their side because the Washington Examiner tells you that Iran increases their military spending by 90% specifically because of the US. At that point, the only risk of conflict is on their side. Let's talk about conflict. That means we win our conflict pre-rep aid. We'll concede that that's true because we're winning conflict on their side. But now let's go to our case specifically. On the Middle Eastern story, there's a lot of blips here. First, they tell you that our allies, they're telling you our allies are going to go and fight. The problem is the Rydell evidence goes clean conceded. It specifically tells you that our allies can't fight without the US because they don't have the military capacity. It doesn't matter what these allies want to do. They just simply don't have the capacity to do it. We specifically tell you, reference Saudi Arabia and that they don't have any airstrike capabilities. But second, let's talk about these specific empirics. They tell you, they tell you sanctions are going to prevent this. I would say I can also frontline defense because Praveen frontline terms, but regardless. On sanctions specifically, I would say what the Parsi evidence tells you is that sanctions existed during this time, and if we were still able to have negotiations, clearly Iran is willing to come to the negotiation table. But the third really crucial piece of evidence here is just the lack of empirics on their side. They just extend a bunch of blank analysis about how Iran won't come to the negotiation table without interacting with the fact that we give you 3 unique times that Iran has come to the negotiation table. The first is from defense, one that specifically tells you that Iran and Afghanistan were able to communicate when US troops pulled out. The second is from Hamaduddin, who tells you Saudi Arabia and Iran were able to put away their ideological differences and come to negotiations when the US pulled out, and the only reason those negotiations went awry was because of the US invasion of Kuwait. And finally, we tell you the Parsi evidence is the cleanest empiric here because it tells you that Saudi Arabia and Iran were able to come to negotiations even during sanctions and reduce airstrikes by 80%. At that point, they have literally no connection into our case. I would say the Atlantic evidence and Financial Times evidence goes clean through. The reason for this is they say that Barzagar specifically tells you at the very, very top that the reason why Iran is specifically upset right now is because the US is taking offensive posture. And Atlantic Council tells you the only reason why they're not doing diplomatic plan that they've already proposed is because of the military troops. It has nothing to do with sanctions. That's the Atlantic Council, Claire. And the Financial Times evidence, which is very, very clean for the long term, tells you that we achieve economic interdependence on our side. Economic interdependence prereqs long-term conflict because if their economies are combined, you're not going to see them go to conflict. And that's why Valesco tells you that these multilateral agreements are going to be 6.7 times more likely to achieve long-lasting peace. The only side with good negotiations and no conflict is ours.
Is it cool if I ask the first question?
Yeah, that's fine.
So the two pieces.
Actually, I have a question.
I'm gonna take this one.
Oh,
so the
okay.
pieces of evidence that you read on Bahrain, are those new in second summary?
No,
No.
you guys just cold drop the fact that Iran doesn't have the capacity to expand, and your warranting is that Iran wants to be like a regional power. If Iran does not have
Okay,
the internal...
Praveen, I gotta stop you there. There's a problem. So the first response you extend says that sanctions just, absolutely obliterate Iran's bank account. They just cannot buy anything anymore, right? And then the third response you said is that their military spending has increased 90%. Which one is it?
No, you're missing the mark. You're missing the mark. What
Like
we're saying
what?
is that...
Hold on. Okay, the first response says they have no money. The second response says they're spending more money. What is happening?
There's a difference between creating defense in your country versus literally going out and trying to invade.
Okay, so the way that you phrase the 90% increase is you're like, look at how aggressive they are. They have a 90% increase in spending. So now you're going through these mental gymnastics where you're like, oh, never mind. They're using this for defense. They don't have any money for offense, but they suddenly increased it by 90%. Like, what is it?
You're either in a double bind, both of which just goes down for you.
Wait, no, not a double bind. You're just reading contradictory responses.
Like if debaters always were to read contradictory responses, then what stops people from reading a bunch of contradictory stuff? I think that we shouldn't evaluate either because allowing you to collapse on one is abusive.
I'm sorry if I missaid it in summary, but I can explain exactly what I said if you want. We tell you the Slavic evidence.
I don't flow Grand Cross. I flow summary though.
Okay, that's fine.
In summary, then, because like this issue is going to become like hot in debate because it's like the biggest.
Just explain what you said. You didn't say anything wrong. Just re-explain it.
Exactly. I'm telling you what I said. So Slavin specifically tells you that sanctions have dropped their currency value by 70%, right? But what the Washington Examiner does is it does like a link between like the U.S. presence and like military spending, right? So
So
I
they
would
can
argue
spend.
that.
Okay,
So they can spend.
can I just stop you there?
So they
If
can
Like-
spend.
if it is true that sanctions have such a big impact on Saudi Arabia's economy, it's a very simple question. How are they also able to increase their military spending at the same time? That's all I'm asking.
We're saying that they can increase their military spending. They're not going to do a full-scale invasion against Bahrain. That's our argument.
Wait. But my point is that the fact that they're increasing their military spending disproves that sanctions are affecting their economy, right? Because if sanctions were so bad for their economy, then they wouldn't be able to increase their military spending at all.
I would say that
we're
the
just
evidence is
Yeah, like why do they have like at the end it's just about money, right? It's about how much like cash they have, right? So like
Y'all's whole narrative is that like we should focus on empirics, right? Like clearly the empirics are disproving your link. But then let's get to your specific arguments. Are any one of your empirics that you extend on multilateralism before or after in 2020 at all?
no, but that doesn't matter. Obviously, in 2020, it's not going to be there because we have military presence in the region.
That's cool. Okay, don't
Are last times when the U.S. wasn't in the region or was defensively posturing in the region.
Oh, it's
also, oh, it's crossed. Okay, cool. So we have like 20 or so seconds. So let me just mute myself here and start time. Okie dokie. So it's going to start on my opponent's case, and then I'll get back to my case and I'll extend some weighing. Is there anyone not ready? On my opponent's case, they can see the Reuters evidence, which indicates that sanctions are there, which means diplomacy can never truly happen. Remember, don't grant them new responses because they have 5 minutes to respond to this, while I have 2 minutes to backline this and final. They conceded that warrant too, which means that this response is true. But even if you don't think that response is true, they just say, oh, 3 times that all this negotiations works. But insofar as none of those negotiations cause the economic interdependence that they themselves say is so important, it's clear that none of those negotiations actually led to what they talk about. So don't let them get offense off of their first link. On their second link, extend the Pollock term, which explains that all of our allies become more scared when the US leaves, which means they start multiple conflicts across the entire region. The brand swing is clear. The Post states their conflicts by saying that in the recent past, whenever we left, Saudi Arabia and other people like that started conflicts like Yemen. They just say that, oh, Saudi Arabia doesn't have capability. All of our allies, other allies can still start conflicts, which means that we win on this turn. And it prereqs diplomacy because there's no way we can have diplomacy if we have conflict. On to our case. They read 3 new responses in second summary. I'll respond to each of them. Their first and third response are contradictory. Don't let them do the mental gymnastics in second final. Their first response says that Iran has no money to spend because of sanctions, and their second evidence explains they increased their military spending by 90%. Clearly, they do have the money to spend. On the second thing about protests, they still have regional actions even when they have protests at home. They're still able to do everything they normally do. There's no reason why this is terminal defense. Let's get to the link chain, which is very clean. The MEPC finds that right now, Iran is not willing to invade Bahrain, but Al-Tamimi says they want to in order to dominate the Gulf and the Strait. Artemisia evidence indicates that the U.S. presence in the Gulf with our battleships and things like that is uniquely key to deterring them from entering the region. We'll link into the Shaham evidence, which indicates that were they to invade Bahrain, Saudi Arabia would see, oh, they're on our oil fields. So they would immediately invade back, which France explains it causes hundreds of thousands of people to die in a conflict. This links into the conceded time frame and prereq weighing. Don't let them make new response in second final. The time frame response says that diplomacy takes years while perception conflicts happen immediately, and the prereq analysis take their entire case out. Once a conflict happens, there's no chance for the stability needed for negotiations, no chance for the GCC to come together, and no chance for the AF to win in today's round. Thank you, and please negate the resolution.
Perfect. We'll just start doing our like 15 seconds of prep time.
I have that as time.
It's going to be going down our case and then down to your case, and then I'll do weighing. I'll do weighing after our case. So our case, weighing your case. All right, is everyone good? Okay. Let's start the time now. At the top, they say that sanctions still persist. First of all, Neha frontline is arguing. We say that we don't have the frontline defense. In second rebuttal, we just need the frontline turns. That's why we responded to the defense later on. Then they say that sanctions still persist. This response doesn't matter because our Atlantic evidence is conceded. It says the only reason Iran is not going to the negotiating table right now is because we have military presence in the region. As long as you remove military presence in the region, we solve after this argument. Then they say that we didn't see the economic interdependence in the past. We said that the COVID-19 situation is unique because right now Iran realizes that it domestically is internally crippled, so that it needs to create negotiations that can create economic interdependence between the region. That's why Atlantic evidence says that when the U.S. pulls out, they're going to create joint economic investments between the Arab states, which is going to push for a lasting peace agreement in the long term, which is our time frame analysis, which I'll get onto in a second. Then they say that allies are going to start conflict. They quote up the Rydell evidence. The Rydell evidence says that allies cannot start conflict in the region because if the U.S. pulls out its military presence, then they don't have the capacity to fight. This is cold conceded. At that point, they have no defense. Go to our link. We say that removing on our first thing about removing the zero-sum game. Our Barnes evidence says that right now, as long as U.S. has military troops on the Iranian border, they're not going to pursue negotiations. But then the Atlantic Council says that they push for a diplomatic plan right now. As long as we pull out troops, then the diplomatic plan will pass. That's critical because the Financial Times says that this will create economic interdependence. The empirics are clean. They quote out the Parsi evidence, which is very, very clean. It says that historically, when we had a defensive posture in the region, we saw an 80% reduction in airstrikes and 0 civilian casualties. This proves that our argument is empirically true. In a conflict where Yemen, where millions of people are dying in famine, this is the best way to link in a conflict be solved by taking away the airstrike capabilities. Okay, on that level, we also say that we have the empirics on the economic interdependence from the Afghanistan scenario. They also quote drop that. That's the defense one evidence. And Valesco tells you that in long-term, we outweigh on time frame because it's 6.7 times more likely to be successful when the U.S. creates these negotiations in the long term. At that point, we say that conflict prerequisite is the argument because if Saudi Arabia does not have the capacity to fight as per the Rydell evidence, then they don't get access to the Bahrain nuclear conflict because that would entail Saudi Arabia fighting with Iran, which would then create the nuclear war. That is conceded. That means that they don't get access to the impact. But then we also said that the Saudi evidence is never actually contested. The warrant is very clear. It said that there's domestic dissent in the region, which is why Iran is not going to actually expand in the region, but they're actually going to solve internally, which is why our Washington they just say that there's contradictory evidence because of our Washington Examiner evidence. We just say that the Washington Examiner evidence was written in 2018. We say that COVID-19 evidence changed the situation. At best, they still don't contest the warrant. There's no link in the Bahrain invasion. Okay, moving on, guys.
I have to go to the restroom real quick. So.
All right, is everybody there?
Jason's coming back. Jason, mute yourself on the call, please.
Is everyone here now? Yeah.
Yes.
All right, perfect. All right, so this is a really good debate. It was a 2-1 decision for the con. So congratulations to Westlake. I was the one who sat, so I'll give my RFD first. I thought this was a good debate, but I think in final focus, it becomes a lot clearer, at least to me, I guess, obviously not to the other two judges in this round. But for me personally, I thought that the affirmative was ahead on most of the debate coming out of the final focus. So I'm going to talk about each argument independently real quick. So first on like Iran, which is obviously like the main bulk of this argument, I saw 2 paths to the ballot that both of y'all were going for. So coming out of final focus, the neg's trying to go for the Iran expanding and wanting to dominate the Gulf and the Strait, and that the U.S. presence is unique to deterring them from doing that and going for the Bahrain scenario. And I thought that the negatives weighing was really good, but I don't think that you were necessarily winning a strong enough link to the Bahrain scenario for me. For me personally, I thought that the internal strife, like the Iranian internal strife dissad that they were reading as defense of the Bahrain argument, not only function as defense that you didn't really respond to very well, and also bypass the contradiction that you point out, but I also think it functions as a pretty solid uniqueness argument and a link for why like this economic interdependence diplomacy deal that Iran wants to push will happen if the United States were to pull out troops, which also doesn't really go responded to at all in this round. So I just thought on the Iran debate, they're just, to me, they were more ahead on that regard, because even I gave you credit in that I didn't buy the 90% increase in Iran military spending and then the sanctions argument they made, because I did think that the way you at least outlined it, it was contradictory. But I do think that the internal strife argument gets them around that. And I think that they're winning that pretty cleanly. And you're not really addressing that on the head, because that's more of like Iran empirically always focuses on domestic issues and will never expand when they have to have those things to worry on. And there was no clash there. So I basically gave them access to like this risk of diplomacy and being able to resolve conflict, which obviously conflict was the terminal impact you both were going for. I thought your weighing was better, and I probably would have voted for you if I think that you were winning a stronger link into the Bahrain scenario, or at least a stronger link than what they had into their Iran diplomacy argument. I'll pass it off to somebody else unless you have any questions.
Okay, I can go next. So for me, it was obviously messy round, but I thought that Final Focus just made it more messy. Mostly I thought I was on the affirmative. I'm like I should be hearing a path to the ballot, not like a second rebuttal. So I was confused about that. But so here's how I saw each voter. So on Iran, I'm looking at whether Iran will expand / go to war or not because of sanctions. And on this point, I'm like, I don't like what I can't make a decision because both teams are giving me different evidence. One team's saying that they don't have the money to do it, don't have the capabilities. And then the other teams, like, they do. And then there was this whole, like, econ, like, I don't know, this, like, econ thing about how they increase their military spending but don't have the money to go to war. That happened very late in the round. So I basically just made that point a wash. I was like, I cannot make a decision. Neither team has told me why I should prefer their evidence or their side or something for that thing. Then for so for that reason, I do not give the affirmative Yemen. So I think that they don't have accessibility to that impact. So I don't give the affirmative Yemen. Sorry, I'm getting my thoughts together. Yes, and also for that reason, I don't give the Khan the Bahrain impact either. I also, because you bring up this oil fields argument again in Final Focus, that was not in summary. And then, like, on the AF side, you guys bring up suddenly that Saudi Arabia can't fight, and I'm like, where was this in, like, the rest of the round? This was also not in summary. I'm like, I don't know where this came from. So where I felt like I had to vote because it was the easiest place and the cleanest place for me to vote was on the point that allies get panicked when the United States leaves. I thought that the Khan says that allies don't have the capability to go to war. That was also not in summary. And I'm like, why don't they have the capability? I don't know why the allies do not have the capability. So I think that the only clean place to vote is there. And because of the prereq weighing, I buy that we cannot do diplomacy if our allies are going to war if we leave the region.
Thank you.
Yeah. But you guys both did very great. Congrats.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Mira.
Sorry, yeah, I don't disagree with anything that was just previously said. I would say yes with respect to issues like allies packing. We've had prior pullouts, as well as other points, more specifically with respect to Iran still attacking even in the instance of diplomacy. I thought those were viable arguments to vote Khan. But to be quite honest with you, the real reason I voted Khan is because I really had a very hard time following anything that was coming out of the affirmative side with respect to rebuttals. I mean, I'm pretty clear in my paradigm not to spread, and that was all that was coming. And I'm not, when I did public forum and I competed at the TOC 3 years in a row, and it was been a little bit, but I never spread. I still struggle to understand spreading. It's like very hard to flow what I can't process. So at the point where I'm looking at the pro case and I see very clear refutations to the foreign aid point, which I think their response kind of went unresponded to with respect to when you increase aid, it decreases GDP and decreases development. To me, that kind of takes out that point. And I already told you my thoughts on Iran. So that was what ultimately left me feeling like I needed to vote negative.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, my mic broke. So I have a question for Judge One.
Yeah, what's good?
On their second response to our second DISAD, where they talked about protests, this was defense, right? This was not offense, right?
Sorry, the internal strife warrant.
Yeah, the internal strife response. Did you evaluate that as offensive or defensive?
So I evaluated that mostly as defensive to the Bahrain argument, but I also just thought that I was just mentioning that I see the offensive potential for it. I think that they were still winning. Like, I don't think there was enough direct response to the Iran economic interdependence, like diplomacy plan, besides like the general framing that you were winning. So if I didn't see a clear link for you into conflict, then I couldn't discount their ability to create diplomacy, which I think probably has a better chance of creating solvency and saving lives or resolving conflict. Like
that makes sense. All right,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Good luck, everybody.
All right,
Thank you.
goodbye, everybody. This was a really good round, and I had fun.